Hello, and welcome to PSYWAR, a weekly podcast of the 8th Psychological Operations Group, Airborne, where we give people an inside look at the Psychological Operations Regiment. Welcome back to PSYWAR. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the future of the Psychological Operations Regiment with both commanders of the Psychological Operation Groups. With us today is Colonel Jason Smith. He is currently the 4th Psychological Operation Group Airborne Commander and formerly served as the commander of 5th PSYOP Battalion. We also have Colonel Jeremy Mushtair. He is currently the 8th PSYOP Group Airborne Commander, a former engineer, officer, and a member of the regiment since 2002. So, why change and why now?
Yeah, so I think two primary reasons that I can think of. So first and foremost, where we've gone in terms of the information environment, we've seen that the information environment is increasingly the battleground. So adversary nations, China, Russia, getting into the space, developing their capabilities, and bringing those capabilities to bear against U.S. interests. That's one of the primary things that we're looking at here. So how are we posturing ourselves to be able to combat those threats? A second point that I would bring up is the fact that because we haven't modernized the force fast enough, what we've seen is geographic combatant commands investing in capabilities at their level because they've not been able to draw from them from here. So the idea is develop the capabilities that are both deployable and fixed here at Fort Bragg to support geographic combatant commands and theater special operations commands and sort of get them off of having to do funding of their own capabilities at their level, which are often very contract heavy.
Yeah. Hey, I'd add one thing to that. It's interesting that you choose the word change. It's a fair word to describe what we're doing. We are changing. I like to look at it a little more as evolving, just because change sounds, for one reason or another, scary to people. And Jeremy's point's spot on. That's the reason that we're doing it. That's the reason for the timing. But truly, to his second point, I think right now we are making some changes that we could have been making gradually all along, and we're playing a little bit of catch up right now. And personally, I would like for the force to look at it as more of an evolution that we don't stop either. We're going to make these changes, if you choose that word. We're going to make these changes, and then we need to constantly be looking at how we evolve as a force intermittently along the way.
So the nature of the business has changed.
Absolutely.
The Army's constantly changing. And I don't know why some soldiers are afraid of change. That's just the nature of that. So I guess evolving is a good word to use. For those soldiers that are actually having doubt, this is going to be effective change, what would you say to those soldiers?
Yeah, so I would say that it's what we make of it at this point. And I think we have a lot of good leadership in place, and we certainly have great soldiers and officers who can carry this change forward. So our job right now is to lead change in the regiment, and I think we're on the right trajectory. I think with demonstrating success with what we've been doing over the years deployed, but also establishing capabilities here, I think that we're on the right track. And so I can understand hesitancy to sort of embrace that. But as we say, capabilities that fail to evolve die, right? And this environment that we're in is all about us. This information environment, adversaries using information warfare, this is entirely what we are the core of, and therefore we have to lead that change ourselves. So I think that we're posturing absolutely right.
Yeah. I think there's one other reason for the update or the modernization, the change, the DCR that everyone keeps referring to, and that is to be able to do things at echelon. My experience in PSYOP is post 9/11, as most of the force, if not all the force right now, and we've been really focused on that counter-violent extremist piece, and I think we've been very, very effective with that, and we've been good at it. We're also structured for that. What we're not currently structured for, in my opinion, is to be able to do things at echelon. We do things really well at that, and we're structured to do things really well at that detachment and team level. But if you look around our headquarters, they're lean. They're really lean. So a battalion, in order to go run a task force, has to pull a company into itself. A group, in order to do a task force, has to pull a battalion into itself. Another thing that this DCR does is update some of that and round out those headquarters elements, the company headquarters as well, by the way, to make us capable of deploying above that detachment and team level in a very effective manner.
All right, so one of the things we're doing is we're actually talking like everybody who's listening knows what the changes were. So let's talk about that. What are the actual changes that are happening? So let's start with 8th. We actually acquired 3rd Battalion, and we gave up some people, didn't we?
Yeah, so there was, on 19 June, there was a swap of units to be able to better align with what we're trying to do. So the 5 regional battalions now aligned exclusively under 4th Group, and then 3rd Battalion, which has the dissemination capabilities, and 9th Battalion for global support under 8th Group. And so sort of the third part of what we're doing in 8th Group then is the establishment of the Information Warfare Center. So that's resident here and designed to be able to provide global capabilities, not just for PSYOP, but for integrated information warfare from here. And I'll let Jason speak to 4th Group.
Yeah, so 4th Group onboarded, as it lost 3rd Battalion, which Jeremy just spoke of, we onboarded 1st and 5th. So we onboarded the Indo-PACOM Battalion and the Southcom Battalion, and we already had the other 3 regional battalions. I think what that does for us, among other things, is allow us to benefit from those efficiencies of experience, where we are focused on one type of battalion and one type of battalion only. They cross all 5 AORs, but they're but they're identical battalions otherwise. So when we think about how to train those battalions and how to equip them, man train and equip them, we're really thinking about one model, and that's really helpful.
That makes sense. So you would say that those battalions are designed basically the same. The only real difference is their focus. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. Yeah, they will. The DCR updates them. We go from multiple different MTOs to really one across the regional battalions, and they are identical except for what region they focus on, which has nothing to do with the DCR or the structure. That's just an unnamed focus.
So MTO is the military table of equipment, which basically lines up everything, personnel and equipment for each unit. So what you're saying is, before you had a whole bunch of different types of MTOs, and now everyone's about the same.
Yes, honestly, I think we had 17. It's in the mid-teens of how many different structures.
That's kind of crazy. That really is. So does that fix some of the equipment problems?
That will follow. That's all part of the .mil PF change request, is thinking about equipping as well. I think the flash to bang on that, it's certainly not immediate, but again, being able to focus on how to equip a regional battalion as opposed to a bunch of different structures is helpful in gaining the experience and being able to equip them well and perhaps more efficiently.
So, sir, you would say that 8th Group is now the globally focused group, right?
That's
is that
correct.
fair? So 3rd Battalion is the dissemination people, and I understand that everybody kind of reaches back to the dissemination battalion to accomplish their missions. How does that kind of partnership work between your group and 4th Group?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing and evolving relationship because 3rd Battalion has some very sought after, very unique capabilities, some of which are deployable, some of which are fixed site, print, broadcast. And so as we are fielding requests from different regions for product support or analytic support or anything like that, we have to work closely with 4th Group to triage those requests and make a determination of what support we can provide to them, or if the support is just organic to ourselves. We're playing through that now as things are unfolding to figure out what our capacity really is based on demand from these other theater special operations commands or the GCCs.
All right, so how does 9th Battalion play into all that?
So 9th Battalion is getting aligned exclusively against special mission units. And so their role going forward is being able to support that globally, capture kill missions and things like that, but a very select group of folks they have to work with and a very high threshold for training and readiness that they have to maintain to be able to support that.
Okay, so back to the MTO. We're talking about changing the force all the way down to the detachment level. So what's changing down at the detachment level? Are we getting more people, less people? How is that working?
Yeah, probably the thing that, before I go into more or less, probably the most fundamental thing is that we're changing our base unit of action to the detachment. And so that is our lowest level unit of action. And we're making those all the same. You know, up to this point, and anyone listening who's familiar with PSYOP would know that we've had a variety of different detachments, often referred to as tactical or regional detachments, and they're structured differently. We're going to make them the same. So it will be a 12-person detachment that can be subdivided as necessary, but with a captain and a master sergeant, a couple of sergeants first class, staff sergeants, but it's 12 people in the detachment, and it's universal. We're not separating the tactical and regional or tactical operational as a mission set now, not a formation type for us.
Okay. So you said that it's going to be a captain, master sergeant, sergeant first classes, and staff sergeants. Well, I know there's a lot of Cypress coming into the regiment now as sergeants.
Yes.
Are we opening up that base plate?
Yeah, the detachments do have sergeant billets as well.
So with the reorganization, is it going to open up positions for officers and enlisted, or are we going to be kind of closing some things down? Just for so I understand how the force is going to evolve.
Yeah. So I didn't. I'll risk maybe getting a little too complex, but I think this is a point that is worth making. I think there's a lot of confusion about this. If you look at our current company structure in Alpha and Bravo companies, not Charlie, because they've been historically what we've called a tactical company. Again, that changes as well. But if you look at just Alpha and Bravo in any one of our battalions, you have 6 detachments. That will become 3 detachments in Alpha, Bravo, and Alpha, Bravo, Charlie will all have 3 detachments. Okay. So on the face of that, it looks like we're losing, if you add up Alpha and Bravo, it looks like we're losing, we are coming down 6 detachments per battalion, 3 in Alpha and Bravo respectively. So you start thinking about, okay, well, there's some captain's positions and some master sergeant positions, sergeant first class, staff sergeant, and sergeant positions that are going away. No, they're not. They're being reinvested elsewhere in the force. Remember, I talked about the company headquarters becoming more robust, so that operations center that we've talked about for years, but it's always been really, really lean. Frankly, pretty small even on the books, but also we understaffed it. The battalion headquarters, the operations shop in particular, grows. The group headquarters grows a little bit. We grow capabilities inside each one of those headquarters, like an S3X, a technical information section. These things that make those headquarters operational more than they've been in recent history. Well, that's where those positions come from. So you do in each one of those battalions lose the 6 detachments, 3 in Alpha, 3 in Bravo, but those positions don't go away. They don't mysteriously disappear and go into somebody else's force. They're reinvested in our force so that we can be operational at every headquarters level and in the Information Warfare Center that resides in 8th Group.
So that's important because we're establishing 5 smaller but 5 detachments within the Information Warfare Center staffed with 37s. So the idea is that each one of those information warfare detachments is focused against national defense strategy priority threats. And so we're growing that capability as we do this reorganization, as we continue to align to the new unit of action. People will slide over from 4th Group into 8th Groups to specifically man that portion.
So you would say that that's kind of aligning to the national defense strategy?
It is. It is. So the way that we're looking to do those activities from here, specifically focused against national defense strategy threats, and then with the global reach from here supporting as required.
Can you talk about the IWC? It's a really new construct, and I'm really curious as to what their focus is going to be on and how that support might actually happen in the future. Is that even planned out yet?
It is. So we've got a vision for it, and that vision entails being the Center for Integrated Information Warfare. So basically, picture having a hard stand information warfare task force located right here. The core is the 37. So we bring in our PSYOP masters of influence, and then we build the other information-related capabilities around them to be able to support integrated information warfare. The idea behind this is, of course, we run into an authorities thing. What can we or can we not do from Fort Bragg? So as we go through this process, part of what we do, we envision being able to actually execute and engage from here. The other aspects would be where we can't, we then pass information off, pass targets off to joint interagency partners to have a network finish against those targets. So really, how do we tether with interagency and joint and then partner forces to be able to be more fluid, more flexible, and more rapid in the information environment?
That which I think seems scary to a lot of people, this information warfare center, I mean, inside our force, it's scary to people. The idea of that being a really significant change, what's it going to mean to me as a young PSYOPer in terms of being able to operate as a PSYOPer does, I think has become less scary as people have begun to understand it. We have people volunteering to become part of the Information Warfare Center now. I was away before taking command, away at the War College, and the then 4th Group Commander, Colonel Bethany Aragon, in a phone conversation, let me know about the DCR in a slightly different version. But this concept of this Information Warfare Center, or the forerunner to it, let's say, was in the concept. Really excited about it long before it happened, because as I look at it, and I think the force is now beginning to look at it, it's an opportunity to really work your PSYOP tradecraft, your PSYOP skills, not just when you're deployed, not just I'm in a readiness cycle where I'm doing individual training, then I'm doing collective training, then I'm available, probably deployed. But to have this fourth element of that, which is I'm actually doing a PSYOP mission from here.
So it sounds to me like we're asking PSYOPers to do more. So some of the PSYOPers I've talked to they focus mostly on the tactical, or they go to the global stuff, and they kind of build their own tribes. So it sounds like we're actually forcing them to kind of cross back over and include the Information Warfare Center rotations. What kind of people are we looking for?
Yeah, so I think first I would point out it's not necessarily asking them to do more. I think that the point is that we're asserting who we are in a way that hasn't been done in probably 30 years. So when you look back at the split where the Army established information operations as a functional area, I don't think we had sufficient investment after that time in our PSYOP forces to actually be the integrator like we had known before that. So the idea that we're masters of influence, and we have a methodology for what we do that other people, other capabilities don't have, that's very important to what this is. To the second piece, what we're looking for is the more mature, more seasoned soldier to come over, and it's also tied with being able to get dwell healthy, right? So the idea that you come out of the schoolhouse predominantly, and predominantly you will go to 4th Group and you'll cut your teeth and you'll deploy, and then you'll mature, and then you'll come over at some point to 8th Group to get dwell healthy, but continue to apply what you know against national defense strategy threats from here. That's very important. So what we're looking for are people with an aptitude for the integrated sort of information warfare, right? People who are either have the aptitude for military deception, special technical operations, OPSEC, some of these other broader capabilities, and how to kind of tie that together and apply it to target. What's my effect, what's my capability, and how do we apply multiple against a certain subset?
And we're in the first iteration of this right now, of course. So we're talking about talent managing toward 8th Group to get folks into the IWC. But the reality is that a year from now, if not sooner, but certainly by a year from now, we're going to be talking about talent managing folks because their timing is right, back to 4th Group as well. So they get to spend time not just at 4th Group, then go to 8th Group, then head out to a TSOC never to return. But some people will inevitably make their way back to 4th Group. Many people will inevitably make their way back to 4th Group. I think it's really exciting, the opportunity to move back and forth that way here.
So it sounds like we're really just getting back to the basics and the core of what PSYOP regiment was. And we're getting ahead of the game because we have to stay relevant, right? You also mentioned dwell time, dwell healthy. For our listeners who don't know what that is, would you care to explain that and kind of how the PSYOP regiment is taking care of their people?
Right. So for being a high demand, low density MOS, really the smallest of the Army branches, with a lot of demand out there for what our forces do, we've had the point where we've had difficulty reaching 1 to 2 dwell. Right. So picture being deployed for 6 months and then being back for a year before you go on your next 6-month deployment, 1 to 2. That's been a challenge for us. And so from SOCOM on down, they've been trying to better enable us to get beyond that. Now, the ideal from SOCOM's perspective is 1 to 3 dwell. They're working to try to progress us, but one of the things that we can do is see what missions can we execute from here. Therefore, you don't necessarily need a force forward. But also with the new unit of action realignment, how do you allocate forces appropriately so that the TSOC can decide where people go against one force tracking number? So in essence, instead of having multiple requirements out there, you get a company and then you execute your requirements based on that, instead of having to go back and forth for numerous dips at personnel to send forward. So I think this is really important in order to try to get to that point where we're not burning out the force. Deployments are still going to be there, but certain things, if anything should be networked and executed from here, it's things that deal with internet-based MISO.
So that is actually one of the things that people are kind of scared about and they're really questioning, right, is operationalizing of a CONUS-based group. Mm-hmm. So normally, or I would say in the past, everything we do is forward deployed. We'd deploy somebody and they would do all their actions forward. And now we're talking about doing some things here. So there's some questions about how that's going to work, or is that focus still going to be out and not, I know we're not allowed to do any of that PSYOP stuff on our own people, but how does that work from doing it from here to the target audience? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So first we have to have the network infrastructure to do it. And the opportunity to network now between us and Army Cyber Command and Cybercom and the Joint MISO Web Ops Center down in Tampa, things like that, has never been a more salient opportunity. So what we're going to do is build this thing out so that we can engage from here. We're going to get postured to be able to do that. And then when the green light goes, whenever that is, to be able to execute from here, that's when we do it. But that doesn't mean we don't have work to do on the front end, because on the front end, we can still provide things to our partners to be able to put out. We can still provide options and CONOPS and things like that for others to execute. And that's the direction that we're going. I think that in terms of, there has been hesitancy in the past about how do you truly operationalize the CONUS base? How do you really have an organization executing from here? Well, that's going to come down to command relationships. And I will tell you that SOCOM is working through that right now, and I think things are looking very good for what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Hey, and let me just piggyback there. There is one thing about, as we do CONUS-based operational support, I sometimes hear people talk about deployment opportunities just getting to the point where they're gone, where we're not going to. That's categorically incorrect. We will continue to deploy forces forward. We have to. There are things that we can do from here, and a lot of the senior leaders in the military say, well, if we can do them from here, then we should do them from here for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that dwell issue. In some cases, we just don't want a large footprint forward, but we have to operate forward. That will absolutely continue, if for no other reason, because of how important partnered operations are to us. So for no other reason, we have to prepare teams, detachments, to deploy forward to work with our partners, to work directly with our partners.
So I really like that point. So one of the things I've learned about PSYOP is the cultural understanding of sending people forward who speak the language, learning the culture, and developing those relationships. That way that can kind of shape the messaging that is effective. So you're saying that we have to push people forward so they can understand those cultures and get the messaging right. Is that right?
Yes, and not just in terms of operational deployments as people get really, really focused on those operational missions, but also in terms of training deployments. I talk to a lot of captains who get concerned about the number of deployments that they will or won't get as a detachment commander. and they're focused on those operational deployments. Well, there are the joint combined exchange training opportunities and the SMEs, the expertise exchanges, and JCS exercises and those types of things. Those are super important. They're important for those individuals to develop in terms of experience. It's even just planning to go out and do something like that is important. But also in terms of fostering those relationships. We're RSOF. I mean, our bread and butter is really the partnered relationship type of operations. It's not the unilateral piece.
So, gentlemen, you were saying that we're not really adding any positions, but the positions that are in the battalions, we're going to lose some positions there, but they're going to the headquarters. So, are we gaining personnel or are we losing personnel with this change?
Neither. We're not gaining or losing. This entire reorganization is what's called no growth, but it's also no reduction. So even using the word lose is a little bit concerning. We're reinvesting positions that would have normally been at the detachment and below into other places like the Information Warfare Center, like those various headquarters. But we're neither gaining nor losing positions.
So, are those positions going to change MOS? Are they still going to be all 37s, or are they going to be?
Yes, none of them is being recoded.
Okay, that makes sense. So, for those guys out there listening that are wondering, with the reorganization, sometimes there's opportunity for promotion. Sometimes promotions slow down. Do you anticipate any changes to how that works?
No, with the no growth, not losing, not gaining any billets, it should the promotion rate should track where they are right now. As you know, that ebbs and flows for any career management field. It's been pretty good for us lately. But a few years ago, people would not have said that. If I go back even further in time, people were coming to PSYOP because of promotion rates. Probably not the best reason to join or to leave an MOS because it does ebb and flow based on the needs of the Army. I'm not going to speculate, but I do think that we're in a branch that is so necessary and is getting so much recognition for being necessary that there could be some growth on the horizon. I'm going to say could be. I don't have a crystal ball and I don't want to make those promises.
Well, I actually see that a lot. When I get junior soldiers in, and they're always wondering when those promotion points will come down or they're going to go up, and they're worried about promotion points. I always tell them the Army is ebb and flow. It changes. Give it a year, it'll change. There'll be a month where the numbers will drop to almost nothing, and then the next day it's going to jump right back up to locking everybody out. I try to tell people that you shouldn't be doing the job because you want to get promoted. You should be doing the job because you love the job. And I think PSYOPers they really love doing PSYOP. I don't think that's actually a thing about the regiment. I don't think they're here to get promoted. I think they're here to do PSYOP work. What do you think about that?
Well, we absolutely want the soldiers to get promoted. It's unhealthy. It's an unhealthy atmosphere otherwise. And my point is simply that it should not be a reason for people to come to PSYOP or to stay away from it because it changes periodically. Rates increase and decrease based on the needs of the Army. So if you see something right now in this moment that attracts you to PSYOP as it relates to promotion or steers or makes you concerned about going to it, it's probably not going to be the same identically 12, 18 months down the road.
I mean, for people who want to be here, and I'm assuming that's the majority of the force, who had to actually go through a selection process, right, had to volunteer, had to do some arduous training and selection to get here, they ought to be excited now, honestly, because the opportunity is great. The opportunity to advance what we do as a force is great. So I think this is a perfect time to be here, to lead change in the regiment, and to be able to advance what we do. Educate the rest of the joint force on what we do, because that education process is difficult with how small of a force we are. But as we expand our ties between the IWC and what the deployed forces do, and you have the simultaneous drawdown of things in Afghanistan and Iraq, we're just going to be increasingly leveraged, and we're going to be able to help shape with these seniors out in these other organizations to understand how to employ these kinds of forces.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and this is kind of off subject from the change. It's related, I promise, because this is an actually opportune time to kind of reinvent the regiment and its core identity. You were saying before that we're getting back to basics, and that's the core of what PSYOPs does. But what do we talk about when we say who is the core of PSYOP?
Yeah, so I would say that to some degree what we're talking about here is reasserting who we are, right? So we've always been masters of influence.
Right.
We've always been that. But the idea is because it's about the cognitive domain, because it's our understanding of how to create change in that environment, we're best postured to integrate information warfare. We're best postured to be able to do things to disrupt, deny, degrade, and influence audiences across the competition continuum. So I think that's important. We're reasserting that we are the core of information warfare. We've always been masters of influence. Our methodology is what makes us different, right? Public diplomacy doesn't have a methodology. Other organizations use our methodology, right? But this is what's central to what we do. How do you actually create behavioral change in a target audience? So I think this is important. Our ability to leverage other information-related capabilities to do dissemination from high-tech to low-tech to no-tech, including sensitive dissemination means, and then using methods from overt to clandestine to deception, that's who we are and what we do. And that's very important for folks to understand.
Yeah. Some of the tools have changed. Some have remained the same. Jeremy's right. For us, it's all about being in that cognitive dimension of the information environment. I think we own that. I think we're very, very good at it. I like to describe it. We've described it at times as our focus is targeting psychological vulnerabilities and triggers in audiences through a variety of means and methods, to include deception and what's known as MISO, as well as other things. To a large degree, that's not a future thing. That's our past, that's our present, and a future thing. Some of the tools change, and frankly, some remain the same. People will spell doom and gloom for things like leaflets. But I'll tell you, if you're trying to get a message into an otherwise denied area, and it's not going to be through electronic means for some reason, leaflets work, and all of a sudden people want them. So our core of what we do is that looking at target audiences and thinking about what triggers, what social triggers we could use to get them to do or to not do something. But the means at accessing them, that's really some of the updated stuff that people are fascinated with right now.
Sure.
And if I could, I think there's an important point too, as we're talking about the modernization of the force, that we're also not in competition with like Army Cyber Command or Cybercom or things like that. So I think it's important to understand. My boss in my last job had a very good point, I think, where he talked about cyber and had mentioned what he called the special relativity of cyber, which means when you're inside of cyber, everything looks like cyber. But when you're outside of cyber, it's just one point in sort of the panoply of dissemination capabilities. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind. That's why we're the core of information warfare. That's just one other point of light across things that we can leverage.
So, gentlemen, recently the War College had a podcast. They had some high-ranking people on, and they were talking about an identity crisis inside the Special Forces. And I'm glad you brought up MISO, because not that long ago, it wasn't psychological operations anymore. We started calling ourselves Military Information Support Operations, MISO. And now we've come back to psychological operations. Would it be fair to say that the PSYOP regiment had an identity crisis? Are we on the back end of it? Are we in the middle of it? How would this change in the regiment affect that kind of core identity?
Okay, so I wouldn't term this an identity crisis, but what I would say is we weren't masters of our own destiny. And that's where we have to be on this kind of thing. So when MISO was chosen as a term, it was not something that we had stakeholdership from within the regiment, right? That was a decision that was made at much higher echelons for seemingly good reasons, but without, what we would do, pre-testing, right? Things like that. So I think that's number one. Number two, MISO is still a thing when we're talking about legislation, when we're talking about doctrine. But I will say this is something we need to change. Right? Again, this was a top-fed thing. We can change this. We can be masters of our own destiny when it comes to what we call ourselves, what we assert is what we do. And so we're taking a look at that right now. I've actually got something that we're pulling together to go and talk to SWCC and say, no, it's not really that. It's sort of these three things that are the basis of what we do, and get off of this term MISO, because it's just not helpful. And it doesn't really describe what we do, right? Because it's military. Well, that's redundant. We got that. It's information support. Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. But then that's convoluted with the fact, is it support or is it operations? Well, I think we can do better. So we kind of have a plan that we're working up in 8th Group. Surprise. And we're going to bring that over to you and have the discussion, because I think that there's something that we can do to kind of fix this and do away with the MISO term, but be clear about who we are and articulate that.
Yeah, and you know, regardless of the term, and I'm eager to see what we're talking about, but regardless of the term, it's not exclusively what we do. That activity that we currently think about and talk about as MISO is still not exclusively what we do. It's the reason that we lean so heavily on that, working within that cognitive dimension of the information environment, and looking at those psychological vulnerabilities that we can play on. MISO is one thing. It happens to be the thing that we train on at a foundational level in our schoolhouse, but it's not the only thing. We've already talked about deception. That's another thing that we do. So yeah, absolutely naming ourselves after a single activity was, frankly, I don't think it was anyone in the regiment who made that decision. But that aside, it was a mistake, and should never have been done, because then you cast yourself as a one-trick pony, if you will, which we're clearly not.
Yeah, so that was my understanding of MISO. It was like something that we did. It's not who we are.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
only one thing we do.
Well, that's right. It was designed to be exactly that, because we had the ubiquitous use of the term PSYOP. We're PSYOP and we do PSYOP. We're PSYOP and we do PSYOP. I think going forward we can kind of adjust that. We've fortunately gotten the PSYOP unit name back, and heraldry had never changed what we were.
Correct. Yeah.
So we've done the right thing with rebranding the organization what they always should have been.
We kept all of our signs in closets across our footprint.
Yeah, but identity matters and culture matters, and so we're on a path to be able to reassert and change those things for the better.
Well, gentlemen, we're getting pretty close to the end of our time. Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about, or anything that you were thinking of that you'd like to bring back up?
Hey, I wanted, a few minutes ago we were talking about the idea of dwell, and I get a lot of questions from our force about dwell, and the concern that as we increase dwell time, there's less deployment time, or fewer deployments, let's say, at the detachment and below level. And I would just point out again that there are things other than those operational deployments. They affect purse tempo, but not dwell necessarily, like all those exercises that we talked about. And though there are people within the force that at times in their career, the dropping to a really, really low deployment to dwell ratio may be okay for them, it's not healthy for the force writ large. It's just not. We, at one point in our force, were at a 1-to-1 or maybe even lower deployment to dwell ratio. And that absolutely had an impact on soldiers. It absolutely had an impact on soldiers. There are some that weren't bothered by it, but there were many who were. There are families that are bothered by that. And then there's just readiness that's impacted. And as the 4th Group Commander, as I look at those 5 regional detachments, and talk about wanting to be able to run a task force at the company level, run a task force at a battalion level, run a task force at a group level, if necessary, to respond to some plan that's currently on the shelf. I need that dwell back in order to get the force healthy to train to those things. Not just they return from a deployment, they take a knee for just a brief moment, and then they start training for the next deployment. But they actually train against their own readiness requirements.
Yeah, I've got one thing that I would bring up, and that's that we're at an inflection point like I have never seen in this regiment. with where we have our leadership lined up to support us, from 1st Special Forces Command to USASOC to SOCOM, all understanding the importance of what we do, all kind of in a race to get us modernized faster. This is huge. And I've never seen it like this before. The closest that I've seen it before was when we had the stand-up of the MESOC
Right.
that was supported by the SOCOM commander. But when the SOCOM commander left, that support left. We're not in that spot. And so we ought not squander this opportunity as a force. We need to all recognize where we are, what we can change. You know, Jason and I are closer to the end than the beginning. So the idea that we need to seize on this now to help our mid-grade officers and NCOs and our junior officers and NCOs succeed and really have a good trajectory ahead of them, this is hugely important. So I ask everybody to pull together on this, because we can actually make a difference now in a way we've not done before.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I know it's very difficult for you to even get white space, but not at the same time. So I appreciate you coming. Thank you for joining us today. If you have questions or comments about today's topic, please comment at 8th PSYOP Group on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. We'll see you next time.